Good afternoon and welcome into another edition of Dodgers Dawgs as part of the Dodgers Daily Network. My name is Austin Brubaker. I'm going to be your host this afternoon, and it's going to be a little bit of a fun show today. Something a little bit different from what I typically do, which there always is some interaction that I'm able to do as part of the show. That is something that I feel like I owe you guys, to be able to go back and forth with you guys with as many comments as I can. But today we're going to be answering as many questions as you guys possibly can have within the time constraints that I have. I've got about an hour or so that I can go ahead and do this show, but I want to be able to answer as many of questions as you guys have. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about some of the transactions that the Dodgers have made recently towards the front end of the show, and then the back half of the show is going to be more interaction with you guys, and I'm really excited about that because Dodgers baseball is happening really soon. In fact, this week is when pitchers and catchers are going to report. Some teams are going to have pitchers and catchers report, I think, as soon as tomorrow, while the Dodgers, I think they're going to be pretty much the last team to have their pitchers and catchers report. Fair enough. They made it to the World Series last year. They want to give those guys at least a little bit of additional rest. They will be reporting on Friday. Pitchers and catchers for the Los Angeles Dodgers will be reporting on Friday this week, which means that spring training games are very soon, rapidly approaching, less than 2 weeks before the Dodgers start spring training games. And I think 2 weeks from today is going to be the first game for the Los Angeles Dodgers at Camelback Ranch. Super excited about that. Super excited to be able to talk a lot of things Dodgers baseball with you guys. So again, please leave as many comments as you can, or any questions that you have that you want me to go ahead and dive into and answer, and I'll try to get through as many of those as I possibly can with some of the time constraints that I have. So thank you very much for tuning in, Chang Lu, Craig Osterberg, Showtime LA. Very excited to be able to do this show for you today. So what I wanted to do first to start off the show, before we get into the Q&A section, which, hang with me, we'll get into that in just a minute, is I want to continue to do at least a little bit of a breakdown / overview of what has happened recently for the Los Angeles Dodgers, particularly their most recent move that they made, deciding to designate for assignment Anthony Banda in order to bring Ben Rortvedt back onto the 40-man roster. And what I wanted to do primarily is look at Anthony Banda as a player and do a little bit of a breakdown, understand from the Dodgers situation why the Dodgers decided to make this decision, where potentially there could be some pushback and disagreement, because I think there is definitely an argument, and there's been some arguments made in some of the comments of some of the previous live streams that we've done, that the Dodgers should have went in a different direction, or at least arguments that they should have went in a different direction. We'll explore that side. We'll also explore Anthony Banda as an individual player to see, was it the right time for the Dodgers to move off of him in exchange for other players that are part of this roster. So that's what we're going to do first. And in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're actually going to take a look at some of the numbers for Anthony Banda. So this is the Fangraphs page for Anthony Banda, and what we're going to be looking at particularly is his 2 previous years in Los Angeles. First, before we go ahead and do this, I want to give you a little bit of an idea of the player that Anthony Banda was once he came into the Dodgers organization. If we go from his debut through 2023, he had a 5.69 ERA, 4.70 expected ERA. The expected statistics were a little bit better than what the actual underlying metrics were. But this was a player that didn't necessarily have a whole lot of success in his big league career, which is why then the Dodgers acquired him. There was a lot of expectation that he would go the similar way of a lot of DFA type of players. However, Anthony Banda made a career for himself. 2024, 3.08 ERA, 3.18 in 2025, which led to, throughout his entirety of his Dodgers career, having a 3.14 ERA. Tremendous, amazing work by Anthony Banda, and we can't thank him enough for the contributions that he had as a player to this organization. So why did the Dodgers decide to move off of him? And I think the easy answer, and yes, we will explore this answer in just a minute, is the fact that Anthony Banda did not have any minor league options. That is very much true, and that limits a lot of moves that the Dodgers can go ahead and make. But what we're going to explore really quick is some of the concerns from last year's numbers. Previously in the show that Casey and I did, I had made some sort of statements that there were some concerns with some of the underlying metrics that Anthony Banda could be due for some type of negative regression going into the 2026 season. These could be some of the numbers that the Dodgers were looking at as to why there was some potential concern for Anthony Banda. Not that he isn't still or couldn't still be a good player, but why there is some concern with Anthony Banda. Looking at the 2025 season, this is taken, the one at the bottom is looking at 2024 and 2025. 2025 is the one that we're going to look at, and we're going to look at this one right here. I'll remove the bottom one. 3.18 ERA, fantastic for him, and including a 3.59 expected ERA. Really solid. The fielding and independent pitching and expected fielding and independent pitching, very much a different story. 4.52, 4.77. Why is that? Where could there be some of the underlying metrics that come into concern with Anthony Banda? There's a couple of different things that you need to know. FIP and expected FIP, they essentially take into account three different scenarios that are all within the control of a pitcher. With FIP, you only take into account strikeouts, walks, and your home runs per fly ball percentage that you go ahead and give up. With expected FIP, it's the exact same thing. Strikeouts and walks, both more under the pitcher's control than batted balls, except with expected FIP, it normalizes the home run percentage to be standard across the board. So thus, if you give up a few more home runs than average, it's going to normalize that a little bit to more of a different standard. So when it's taken into account that, let's look at Anthony Banda's strikeout and walk percentage. What you'll notice is the strikeout percentage was relatively the same, about a 1 percentage dip, but the walk percentage rose up pretty dramatically for Anthony Banda, close to 12.5, over 12.5%, I should say, for Anthony Banda this previous season. So you saw more walks for him, which I think led to and was in part due to some of the inefficiencies and some of the decreases that we saw with some of his pitches, including some of the stuff metrics and some of the go ahead and actual pitch value that he was able to get off of some of his pitches. So if you go down on Fangraphs, you can actually look at different measures such as stuff plus, which is what we have measured, and you'll notice from the 2024 season to the 2025 season, his sinker went down from about a 118 stuff plus to about a 105 stuff plus. There's been a dramatic drop off in the effectiveness of that pitch, at least by a stuff plus type metric. Same thing with his slider, drop of 11 points in his slider stuff plus percentage, to the point where his overall percentage of stuff plus dropped by 4 points. His location was off, which means that if the stuff was getting a little bit worse and the location in which he was actually throwing it got worse, he was less effective as an overall pitcher. And I think you can see that even with some of the stuff, like his swinging strike percentage dropped by 2.5 points. Swinging strike percentage, meaning the percentage of pitches that you swing at divided, or percentage of pitches that you swing and miss at, divided by the overall number of pitches, because hitters were starting to swing a little bit less at Anthony Banda's stuff. Go over to Baseball Savant and you look at some of the individual pitches with Anthony Banda, and what you'll notice a couple of different things. There is a slight decrease in velo for his four seam and sinker, going from about a 96.1 to about a 95.9, 95.8. That's not a massive drop off, but that could be just enough to be a tick off for Banda. And you saw some of the decrease in effectiveness of each one of these pitches. You look at his four-seam fastball last year, or in 2024, which he threw the most out of all of his pitches. It had a 310 weighted on base average, rose up to 374 last year. You look at his slider, which was massively effective for him in 2024, 169 weighted on base average, even better expected stats, 223 weighted on base average, 246 expected weighted on base average. Still really solid, but it also got a lot less swings and misses, 51% versus 38% going into from 2024 to 2025. With his sinker as well, it got hit a little bit more. So you saw Anthony Banda and his effectiveness as an overall pitcher just start to decrease a little bit overall. You saw the underlying metrics because he was getting around as much swing and miss, a strikeout percentage around what it was, but it was combined with a lot more walks than what we were usually having for Anthony Banda. And you look at the overall stuff that he had wasn't quite as sharp stuff plus wise as it had been in previous seasons. And you just look at the overall statistics for Anthony Banda as the overall season, and by FIP and expected FIP, it seems as if Anthony Banda might have gotten a little bit more lucky last year than what is expected to have happened this upcoming year. And you look at some of the projections for Anthony Banda in the 2026 season, and you'll notice by all of these different metrics, you can look at Steamer, you can look at Zips, you can look at the bat, you can look at all these different ones. ERA does not start with a 3 as it has the past couple of years for the Dodgers. It starts with a 4, and it's usually in the low to mid 4s type of range for Anthony Banda this upcoming season, which means that a lot of the projection models say that the effectiveness that Anthony Banda has going into the 2026 season is not as well projected as what he has been on the past. Perhaps it's something where he completely defies the odds of what is expected and continues to have the same level of success that he has had in the past. But this is to say that the type of player that he has, there's some questions projectability-wise for him going forward in the future. And you combine that with the fact that he does not have any minor league options. And the reason why that's important is because the Dodgers make a lot of moves to move guys up and down. I don't have the exact number. I have a very loose estimate of what the number is. But last year in the 2025 regular season, the Dodgers, with guys on their roster, either optioned or designated for assignment pitchers, I think it was somewhere between 40 to 50 times last year, which means you're talking about every 3 games or so having to make a move on the pitching staff to provide some sort of fresh arm into the mix. Anthony Banda, if he's not a part of this roster, does not have the ability to go up and down as part of the Dodgers organization if he is not on the official roster, which means that the Dodgers had to make a decision of what they wanted to do with Anthony Banda's role as a player. And I think because the amount of times that the Dodgers needed to last year and likely will need to in the 2026 season in order to keep their arms as healthy as they can throughout the regular season to get them through October, I think they preferred some of the flexibility that they had on their roster. And if some of the projections, which certainly these are not the exact same projections that the Dodgers use, but they have similar-ish projections that they have for each one of their players going into this upcoming season. If they project Anthony Banda to be more of a mid-4s to low-4s type of ERA, I think they're looking at some of the players that they have on their roster and saying we can probably get away with similar production from guys that we can have a little bit of increased flexibility on their roster to be able to move guys up and down. That is the argument that you can make. I wanted to provide a little bit more full context of what was going on with some of the underlying metrics with Anthony Banda. This is not to say Anthony Banda has not provided value for the Los Angeles Dodgers, nor that he is a bad pitcher. He is not a bad pitcher. He has had an ERA of 3.14 over the past 2 seasons and 115 innings. That is extremely impressive for him, and he has played an instrumental role on this Dodgers team the past couple of years. The question is there still more, or is the best for Anthony Banda going into his age 32 season yet to come? Or did the Dodgers maximize on the value of Anthony Banda, who, while he is able to do a couple things well, including getting left-handed hitters out really effectively, if you look at some of the splits that he has, let's go back into the 2024 season first and be able to show this. Let's go ahead and cut back over so you guys can go ahead and see some of these numbers, some of the splits. If you look versus left-handed pitching, he had a 1.92 FIP and a 2.76 expected FIP against left-handed pitching in the 2024 season. That is, if you look at weighted on base average, 251 for Anthony Banda versus 303 versus right-handed hitters in 2024. In the 2025 season, his weighted on base average was even better against left-handed hitters, 226,
It was worse versus righties, 326 against right-handed hitters. You look at his FIP and expected FIP versus left-handed hitters, 334, 442 expected. So that got a little bit worse from what it had the previous season. And then right-handed hitters hit him fairly well last year. So he does provide some value, and I'm certain that there are going to be teams that go ahead and take Anthony Banda into their mix and be able to add him to the roster, either through some sort of Dodgers trade, which actually is my guess of what is going to happen, assuming that it has not happened quite yet for the Los Angeles Dodgers, any sort of trade for Anthony Banda. That would be my guess as to the role, because I think there's going to be several teams that are interested in the talent that he has. If it's not through that, my guess is there is going to be a team that is planning on claiming Anthony Banda to be able to add into their mix, and he will join another team, another organization, in which he's going to provide one of those shutdown left-handed relievers against left-handed hitters. I think that's going to be a really good role for him, just not one where the Dodgers felt like, I think they saw the different options that they had and preferred some of the roster flexibility that having guys with options is going to be able to provide for this team, especially considering the amount of times that the Dodgers option guys up and down from their minor leagues to their major league roster. Again, 40 to 50-ish times, either they option somebody back down or released some guy from their major league roster, specifically on the pitching side. That's not the total transactions, but that is more on the pitching side, at least with a very loose estimate. So every 3 to 4 games, expect some type of transaction, some type of movement on the overall generalized aspect for the Dodgers to be able to provide some additional rest for some of their arms this upcoming season. So this brings up a little bit of an interesting question, and the question is, why now? And why Anthony Banda in place of insert a name? And this was actually brought up by one of the people that views and watches, really great contributor here at Dodgers Daily, Jay, had mentioned he would have preferred it to be Ryan Ward. And actually I have some sympathy with the argument that it should have been Ryan Ward instead of an Anthony Banda. I've already gotten to some of the conversations, particularly with Ryan Ward as his overall situation. Get into something just a second, because I think there is, when you talk about labor negotiations, I think there is something I would like to propose for Major League Baseball and for the players to make some sort of slight change to some of the agreements that they have to prevent potentially one of the situations that Ryan Ward might enable himself in. But why was it Anthony Banda instead of a Ryan Ward, especially when you look at the outfield situation? Teo, Andy Pages, Kyle Tucker, and very likely Alex Call, because he can play center field. Those are your 4 outfielders. Ryan Ward is at the AAA level. And the reason why I have some sympathy with this is the timing of when they are deciding to move off of Anthony Banda. I think they potentially, not that they decided to do this, but they potentially could have waited to be able to go ahead and make this move until they knew that a lot of their guys were more healthy in spring training. And this is the argument to go ahead and designate for assignment, for example, somebody like a Ryan Ward as opposed to an Anthony Banda. The argument would be you want to keep as much pitching depth in your organization, especially quality pitching depth, because we've seen Anthony Banda results-wise being somebody that has been really effective for the Dodgers in the past. You want to keep as many of those guys in-house, especially because you don't know which pitchers are going to get injured throughout the course of spring training. So rather than designate Anthony Banda for assignment now, this would be the argument. You designate for somebody for assignment that you know you do not have any sort of plans for. Because let's be fair, let's be honest, there really is not any plan for Ryan Ward on this roster, because I fully anticipate the Dodgers towards the end of this week or sometime next week to decide, hey, we're going to bring back Kike Hernandez. And then there's another bench spot that is already filled up. And I don't think the plan is going to be we're going to have Andy Pages and only Tommy Edman be our backup center fielder. I think they want somebody on their bench that's going to be a little bit more reliable as a center field. And I also don't think, and this would also be the argument of potentially where the Dodgers mindset is they're saving Ryan Ward potentially for later towards October to be a left-handed bench bat to be able to come into the mix. But I don't think getting him in some of his very first big league plate appearances to be in the postseason is going to set up Ryan Ward for a whole lot of success in postseason. So I really don't see any type of role for him. Whereas, and this is the argument for DFAing, or the Dodgers should have DFAing Ryan Ward as opposed to Anthony Banda. You don't know which pitchers are going to get injured, which pitchers are going to be healthy. Once you have a little bit of a better idea, even if you value roster flexibility, even if you value some of the other lefties that are part of your mix, you get through a good majority of spring training, and then that is when you potentially make some sort of roster call. So then you are seeing if there is some sort of need early in the season for Anthony Banda before going ahead and moving off of him. I think that roster construction-wise could very well be an argument that I actually have a lot of sympathy for going forward for Anthony Banda. If the Dodgers had made a different decision, if they decided to DFA somebody like a Ryan Ward as opposed to an Anthony Banda. Thus, the Dodgers did not make that move. They decided now was the right time to be able to pull the trigger on DFAing Anthony Banda, and he will not be, or most likely will not be, a Los Angeles Dodger in the 2026 season. We can't thank him enough for what contributions he had in the Dodgers uniform, and ultimately, this is what you hope for. You hope for the Dodgers to be able to get the best out of players when they come to an organization. That's what we have been able to see thus far in Anthony Banda's career, but you also hope for the players' sake that they can reach new level, they can continue to keep up with the same success, same trajectory that they have had in the Dodgers organization on other teams as well. So obviously going to be rooting for Anthony Banda going forward in his future organization, wherever that is. With Ryan Ward, I had mentioned something about some sort of proposal. This is what I see as a potential issue for some of the players, especially some of the players that spend a lot of time at the minor league level, then get added to an organization. One change that I think I've talked about this briefly in the past, and this was something that I would very strongly advocate for if I were as the Players Association, the Players Union, is I would want there to be some sort of option added for players that are 6 years in the minor leagues and are about to enter free agency. So, for example, the reason why I bring this up, Ryan Ward, he spent 6 years in the minor leagues and then was about to be a minor league free agent. Before the Dodgers, right before he was about to enter free agency, they decided, because they still had the rights to Ryan Ward for at least a couple more days, decided to add him to the 40-man roster. So then free agency was nullified for Ryan Ward going into the upcoming season. And now Ryan Ward has 3 option years in which technically for the next 3 years for his age, I think it's 28, 29, and 30 season, he could potentially spend that entire time down in Oklahoma City and then enter free agency at his age 31 season with no major league experience and no real reason for teams to be able to want to make any sort of big splash, big investment in a player like that because he's losing out on some of his prime years. So this would be some of the proposal, just slight adjustments that I would have, is because Ryan Ward did not have any option to be able to go and be added to the Dodgers mix. What I would do is I would create some sort of deadline. You can say about trade deadline around the time period that what I'm looking for players that are in their 6th or final year of under minor league control before they enter minor league free agencies. Create some sort of deadline like trade deadline time period where the organization has to make some sort of choice. Either add that player right then to the 40-man roster, in which case they either get major league experience right then, or one of their option years gets utilized that particular year, in which case they would only be under potentially team control instead of 9 years for 8 years. Or if the Dodgers, if we're a major league free agent or major league front office does not make that choice, then that individual player who would be entering into minor league free agency would get some sort of choice if a front office like the Dodgers wanted to add Ryan Ward onto their 40-man roster. Ryan Ward would have a choice whether or not to accept that addition to the 40-man roster or become a free agent and seek other opportunities. And the reason why I'm so passionate about this is because Ryan Ward is essentially screwed. on this roster because I don't see any sort of path for him to continue go and actually have major league success. And while the system is set up to where the Dodgers should make that type of move, I think it would be in the best interest for the players to be able to have at least an option, and all it would cut off is a couple months for the organization to be able to make a decision and maybe 1 year of free agency. I don't think that is a massive shift, massive change in the overall regime of what we have, but it would fix some of the underlying problems that we have. We do not live in that system, and thus Ryan Ward is part of the Dodgers organization. I've advocated that the Dodgers should find some sort of trade partner. Thus, it would have potentially made sense for the Dodgers to DFA and look for a trade for Ryan Ward instead of an Anthony Banda. But I also understand why the Dodgers decided to move off of Anthony Banda at this point because of his lack of flexibility on this roster, because of some of the concerns number-wise of future negative regression, I should say, towards some with some of the numbers that he has, and because the Dodgers have different priorities and different necessities in order to maintain the health of this roster. And it's not just the quantity of arms, it is also guys that can go ahead and have flexibility in and of themselves. Anthony Banda, great to be able to add in for the quantity of arms that the Dodgers have, but not necessarily for the flexibility of arms that the Dodgers could have on this roster. Again, with 0 minor league options, there's already several different options that the Dodgers have in which they don't have any minor league options. Looking over at the list with the roster construction, this is something that I've turned to quite a bit. The Dodgers right now, 5 different guys without any minor league options: Diaz, Gratterall, Scott, Treinen, and Vesia. Also Brock Stewart, if he is healthy, added to that mix. Brock Stewart is healthy and all these guys are healthy. There's only 2 relief spots that can be optioned up and down. And if you need optionable guys every 3 to 4-ish days and the general average, not really a whole lot of room for guys to be able to move into the mix, and you don't want too many more of these guys, especially with some of the anticipated addition or potentially anticipated addition of somebody like an Evan Phillips, who won't have any minor league options as well and could return at some point through the 2026 season. So I think they preferred some of the flexibility that some of these other guys were able to have, as well as not a massive difference in the projected production that these players would have. So I think that was ultimately the decision to decide to move off of Anthony Banda. It's a little bit further of a breakdown on that scenario. Hopefully that provided you guys with at least a little bit of an insight of what some of the underlying metrics might have suggested and why the Dodgers ultimately decided to make this move, even despite the fact that Anthony Banda has been so good for the Dodgers recently. We've also touched a little bit on the Ben Rortvedt, Dalton Rushing type of scenario. I'm sure if you guys have specific questions about that, I'd be more than happy to be able to answer those specific questions. But what I want to do now, and for basically the remainder of the show, is answer as many questions as you guys have. I'm going to be going back to the beginning of the chat, trying to get through as many of these questions as possible. So if you guys have questions that you want me to answer, or things that you want me to break down, or perhaps differences in what I think, I want to hear those, and I want to be able to have a little bit of conversation back and forth. I've got about another 30 minutes or so that I can go ahead and do on this show, but more than happy to be able to interact with each one of you guys. So first question that we have comes from Chang Lu. It says, I hope the Dodgers before the regular season trade for Tarek Skubal, and then also makes a statement the regular season starts, the rosters are in great shape. I think there's a couple of key things that are part of that, and part of the reason why I think the Dodgers might not immediately trade for Tarek Skubal actually comes from one of the points that is mentioned right there. So obviously the reason why you would trade for Tarek Skubal is if you have the option or the ability to go out and get somebody with as high of a ceiling as Tarek Skubal, which if you're looking across teams of Major League Baseball, there's nobody that is perhaps more suited, aside from maybe the New York Mets, to be able to go ahead and acquire somebody like a Tarek Skubal than the Los Angeles Dodgers, and he is one of the best couple pitchers in the game of baseball. The Dodgers very well could make this decision. One of the reasons why you could decide, and the Dodgers could decide not to make this trade, is not just because it could be extraordinarily expensive, not financially wise, but prospect and impact to the roster future wise that it would cost to get a Tarek Skubal, but also because it is one of those things where you don't know what the future needs for the roster are going to be. Things look great for the Dodgers and typically have looked really solid for the Dodgers on paper going into seasons, but then things happen. And perhaps it is something where the Dodgers look at their roster and they feel comfortable with where it is on opening day and know that the opening day version of the Los Angeles Dodgers is not going to be the final version of the 2026 Dodgers season, and there is likely going to be some tweaks that are going to be needed to make. Whether this is through underperformance or whether this is because they have other areas that they go ahead and need to address, injuries, a lot of stuff happens throughout the course of the season, and wanting to be able to hold on to some of your pieces. So if needed, they can go ahead and address that. Very well could be a decision that the Dodgers could go ahead and make. So I think there's a couple of areas. I actually agree with kind of both of the sentiments. It would be great to be able to acquire Tarek Skubal. The roster on paper would look great. But I think it is because it is just on paper going into opening day that the Dodgers might decide to wait at this point to be able to go ahead and make that move. We've talked about Tarek Skubal. I'm also not fully convinced that the Tigers are going to trade him, even though it might be in the best interest for the organization to go ahead and trade Tarek Skubal to get some value long-term for the Tigers organization. I just don't know if they are going to do that. Craig Osterberg, good to see you in the chat. Showtime LA. Hey, Austin, was wondering if you can confirm if Carson Hobbs has an above average rise and views vertical break on his fastball. I was looking around the internet and checked, and I know Casey had said he averaged around 26 RPMs on his fastball. I don't have that confirmation just because I don't have a lot of the non-public minor league data. I wish I did. I would go crazy or not crazy in a good way, meaning I would explore a lot of that information if I had access to a lot of the data on the minor league side that's not on the not more public. But when Casey says that information, it usually comes from either the player themselves or from somebody that had coached that individual player that would have access to that information. So if Casey has stated that, my guess is that came either from Carson himself, who has been on Dodgers Dawgs, part of the Dodgers Daily Network, or that has come from one of his coaches, in which case, man, that is really exciting to be able to say that, combine that with some of his other pitches that he has that I think it's technically, I can't get it confused a little bit, slider, curveball. There's some really nasty pitches that Carson Hobbs has, and we'll just have to wait soon enough. He'll be able to make his big league debut, and then you'll be able to get the overall read of where his pitches are at. Craig Osterberg, players usually stay in shape. What is their routine to get into baseball shape? Really good question. I don't have an answer to that just because I'm not a major league player, nor have I had really a whole lot of those conversations with baseball players, but I'm sure there is a lot of things that they do to be able to keep in shape, even more so than what they've done in previous years. A lot of emphasis is put on making sure that you are in the best condition possible, and this is something that is really heavily emphasized in the Dodgers organization up and down the system. And this goes down to the minor leagues, them feeding their players correctly. It's not just an investment into those players, but it's a mindset that you need to be in the best shape that you possibly can be, and we're going to give you the resources to be in that best possible shape. So I'm not exactly sure what is going on with that or what goes into that, but players do a really good job with going into that. Showtime LA, pretty surprised we haven't gotten the non-roster invite list yet. Yeah, that's a good question. We should be getting that over the course of the next couple of days, would be my guess. But we haven't even gotten the invitation to spring training list yet by the organization. Once they announce that, Casey and I, well, I'm sure we'll be able to do a breakdown, and including some of the guys that might not be as highly publicized about, or guys that you have not seen on the big league roster yet. We'll be doing a little bit of a breakdown of what to expect for spring training going into this upcoming year. Greg Osterberg, when do players on the WBC report to the team? I think I don't have the exact date on that, but the WBC takes place somewhere between the 5th of March to the 17th, 18th of March. Very loose estimates. My guess is maybe a couple days before that. So you could be looking at end of February. They're more in Dodgers camp. And then shortly after that, they go ahead and report to their team with the WBC. Not sure exactly with that. Please don't quote me on exactly those dates. Daniel Berry Sports Highlights. Happy Monday to you as well. Ela Shiva-Jones, Blake Snell to start the season on the IL. We had actually talked about that, I believe, last week during our previous show about there at least being concerns with Blake Snell going into this upcoming year. Obviously, him starting the year on the IL is not confirmed, nor do we know that exactly quite yet, but it is something where it very well could be Blake Snell is needed to start the season on the IL. We break down the overall pitching plan priority on Monday's show last week, so if you didn't get a chance to be able to watch that, be sure to go ahead and check that out. Excuse me. Showtime LA, do you think this year Josue De Paula starts elevating at a league average or above average level? I read he's been working on his defense most of last offseason. I wouldn't be surprised if he's working on his defense. Obviously, that's an area that hasn't been the greatest strength for Josue De Paula throughout his career, or at least especially in comparison to what his offensive performance is. There still needs some additional steps that he needs to take on the defensive side, so I would not be surprised if he's focusing on that. With De Paula, I think it's going to be one of the main things that he has before he can start focusing on that. As Casey and I have talked about on the show, is just not just the pitch recognition, but the swing decision type of model. What I'd be curious about, and we see his overall swing percentage, what I'd be curious about with Josue De Paula going into this upcoming year is to see what his swing percentage on especially in the middle of the zone, is going to be, and how that compares to the rest of AA pitching. That type of information is not public. What my guess would be is at some of the lower levels, because of some of the command that pitchers have had, that swing percentage is probably a lot lower than below league average type of scenario, or at least lower than what it is in comparison to some of the other teams, just because the swing percentage is just so low. So I think you potentially could see for this upcoming season, even though Josue De Paula is great at laying off pitches, we talked a lot about him making the decision to be able to swing at pitches perhaps a little bit more, just to be able to cut down on some of the potential concerns that you could see with his strikeout percentage if he's swinging as few of the pitches as he normally has. When it comes to him elevating baseball, I'm waiting to be able to see how he makes that adjustment to AA pitching first. First, I want to see some of the swing decisions to be correct, and then we will take a little bit of an evaluation of what the impact to some of the baseball is. So it first starts with the decision, then it comes to execution. I'm excited to see what Depot is going to be able to do this upcoming year in AA once he gets his full year, or at least vast majority of the year at AA pitching. That's where I expect him to be most of the year. He obviously in 2024, halfway through the season, made the promotion for Great Lakes, and then all of 2025 spent in Great Lakes until this loon season was done, and then got the promotion to AA. So I would expect vast majority of the season to be spent at the Tulsa Drillers, where he can make a lot of these adjustments. So we'll see what happens for him. Ela Shiva-Jones, is Edman expected to start the season in the IL? Looks like it. Could be. I think with the decision to go ahead and DFA Andy Ibanez, my read on the situation was Andy Ibanez was added to the roster as insurance for a Tommy Edman. When the Dodgers decided to DFA Andy Ibanez, it was a risk. My guess, and we explained this on the show, because he's between 3 and 5 years of service time, my guess is the organization wanted to sneak him through waivers so that he can be just a really well-paid player at the AAA level and be more depth on this team. My guess is they wanted to keep Andy Ibanez part of the situation, but they were willing to take that risk to let him go to the organization once the organization decided to bring back Michael Ciani. And because they decided to go ahead and DFA Andy Ibanez, I actually am slightly more optimistic than what I was previously when the Dodgers added Andy Ibanez to the mix, because my read on the Andy Ibanez addition was it was a short-term fix for Tommy Edman, because Andy Ibanez can hit against left-handed pitching really well, plays solid defense, and can play multiple different infield positions. Sound kind of similar to what Tommy Edman's type of role is. So I don't think Tommy Edman is going to start the season on the IL. In fact, I think it's a little bit, at least since they took that risk. I think they're still holding out hope that he can start the season on the major league roster, but I don't think they're going to rush him back necessarily. So we'll have to wait and see as we get through spring how Tommy Edman is doing. And my hope as an organization is they want to rush Tommy Edman to be on the major league club. And if it is something where, man, they're starting the season, he needs to start the season out slow, they go ahead and start him on the injured list, and then we'll see what happens from there. Craig Osterberg, let's see. Banda has rubber-armed, pitch 4 to 5 times a week. Who takes his spot as a workhorse? He definitely does. And last year we saw him, I think it was 71 innings pitched for him overall in the season. The previous season with the Dodgers, and a couple months time frame, he pitched 48 innings. I think you potentially could see somebody like, and I'm thinking to guys that have pitched more quantity of innings in the past, and I'm going to guys like a Ben Kasparius or a Justin Robleski, maybe even a Kyle Hurt, although I would be a little bit hesitant on that just because he's coming back off of injury. But I'm thinking of guys that have been a little bit more starters-ish, that can go ahead and pitch quantity of innings. I don't think it would be as much of a quantity of appearances as much as Anthony Banda. I think that's when you do a little bit good of a mix with guys. But if you're talking about the innings total that Banda can go ahead and fill in, I think you can turn to and perhaps get a little bit more prolonged outings for either a Ben Kasparius and Justin Robleski in there into the mix. When it comes to quantity of appearances, that's actually a really good question. I'm not exactly sure who that's going to be this upcoming year, and I'm excited to see who is going to be able to step up into that mix. Craig Osterberg, how will the electronic strike zone affect the game? I think it's just going to lead to better decision, or at least going to take away some of the egregious calls by some of the umpires, because I think it's going to be really helpful for them to be able to define the strike zone as well as provide some sort of check in the overall game. So I don't think it's going to have a massive impact. I think it's going to be something where you're going to see it throughout the game, and there's going to be at least several points throughout the game where batters and pitchers are going to go ahead and challenge pitches. I think it's just going to make the overall game a little bit better and take away some of the worst balls and strike calls that we see throughout the game. NorCal Eddie, smartest show on YouTube. Really appreciate the support that you have for this show. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down if you have not already. Let's see. Craig Osterberg, I think Ben Rortvedt will be the backup catcher to Will Smith. Dalton Rushing will be traded if he struggles. I'm still on the board of Dalton Rushing being the backup. In fact, this is something that I did not mention on the previous show, and nor do I take massive stake in this. But one thing that I actually found to be rather interesting is, and I don't think this was completely unintentional, is the Dodgers on their X page, on their Twitter page, right after they made the announcement that they had decided to claim Ben Rortvedt and designate Anthony Banda for assignment. You'll actually, if you were paying attention, notice something that was rather intentional and part of the mix. The very next post, which was not long after, was very specifically a post with an interview with Dalton Rushing and Jose Mota. And I don't think that was completely unintentional. I think the organization did that, or at least it was done out there, at least as some sort of statement that Dalton Rushing is still part of our plans. Dalton Rushing is still part of the mix, and this move doesn't completely impact him. Now, you can have a lot of conversations about whether it should be Dalton Rushing or Ben Rortvedt, and with what Ben Rortvedt was able to do in the 2025 season, you have to throw up your hands and say it was awesome what he was able to provide, at least for what the Dodgers needed at that particular time. But I think, again, the Dodgers are going to look at the upside of what Dalton Rushing has and still want to be able to prioritize that. It is still my expectation. You can disagree with this, but it is still my expectation that the Dodgers want to keep Ben Rortvedt as part of this organization, but I don't think they want to sacrifice Dalton Rushing's development in order to be able to add Ben Rortvedt to the mix. And I think the only way that the Dodgers could think about trading Dalton Rushing is if there was some sort of massive trade package for potentially somebody like a Tarek Skubal. If you want to make that argument, that's a fair and valid argument. I'm not anticipating that being in the works as of yet, and I'm still expecting Dalton Rushing because of the upside that he has and because of the organization's commitment to Dalton Rushing in the past. I think they want to keep him around, and I think the Ben Rortvedt move, at least right now, is adding him to the mix, and then they're going to try to figure out some sort of roster manipulation type of thing, likely through, and this is the only way that it would happen, an additional DFA, knowing that all other teams decided not to claim him except for the Cincinnati Reds, who then later DFA'd him. My guess is the Dodgers will likely try to pass him through waivers at some point. Don't know if that's going to be when they add Kike Hernandez or Evan Phillips to the lineup. Don't know if that's going to be once they see everybody is healthy through spring training. But I think at some point that, at least as of right now, is going to be my guess of what happens with the Ben Rortvedt situation, because I think he outperformed what he has done in the past, and I think the best is yet to come for Dalton Rushing. But certainly a lot to prove for Dalton Rushing going into the 2026 season. Showtime LA, how long are you expecting Quintero and Sirota to stay in Great Lakes? Also, is Q actually his nickname? Yes, I can confirm Q is actually his nickname. It was funny because around the time when Eduardo Quintero got promoted, it was Nelson Quiros, the catcher for Great Lakes, got promoted to Tulsa. And Nelson Quiros, if you're around Great Lakes team, his nickname was Q. And then Eduardo Quintero got entered into the mix. It was basically the exact same team. At least with the Loons team of the 2025 season, they were calling him Q all the time. So that was his nickname that he had. And then Sirota. So when talking about both of them, my guess is they're going to take at least a little bit of a similar-ish path that they took with a Zaire Hope or a Josue de Paula from 2024 to 2025 with Eduardo Quintero this upcoming year, only because there's a lot of different outfielders in the mix for Tulsa this upcoming year. And I think they want to provide some of those guys some playing time, and they want to be able to work on certain things with Eduardo Quintero and Great Lakes. So I would expect a good majority of the 2026 season for Quintero to probably be in Great Lakes. You could make the argument it's at least the first half is what he's going to have. With Sirota, it's going to depend on how he's looking and how he comes back healthy. If he comes back healthy and he's hitting as well as he did when he first came up to Great Lakes, I don't think it's going to be too terribly long that he's going to be at the Great Lakes level before they go ahead and promote him. So I would expect Eduardo Quintero to stay longer in Great Lakes than what Mike Sirota had, obviously depending on how they are hitting at the level. Lucy Chen, I still expect the Dodgers to DFA Ben Rortvedt and hope no one is claiming him to send him to AAA. That is the only way to send Ben Rortvedt to AAA, is to DFA him and then hope that he passes through waivers. And then because he is going to make $1.25 million and doesn't want to forfeit that contract because nobody would claim him for that contract, decides to take the option to return or go back down to Oklahoma City. That's going to be my guess too. Perhaps I'm wrong. And we'll see what the Dodgers actually decide. But I'm with you, Lucy. That at least is my thought process of what's going to happen. What's good to you? Left on base too often as well. Kristen Rivaro, good to see you as well. Let's see. Ayla Shiva Jones, curious how the Dodgers' 3 catchers will kind of report out. R. Carino 5, where's Casey? Casey is off on Mondays. He's got things that he's got to go on, so he leaves it to me to be able to run a solo show. I typically am able to do solo shows on Monday. I try to get them out as often as I possibly can. Casey off on Mondays. I'll be back with him, I believe, Wednesday this upcoming week. He tries to do a solo show on Sundays. Obviously, not one yesterday. He was planning on hopefully being able to do one, but with the Super Bowl yesterday, made it very difficult to be able to schedule one on a Sunday. So it's typically Sunday, Casey solo show. Monday, my show that I'm able to do by myself, solo show. And then Wednesday and Friday, we try to get together and do as many of those as possible. And then sprinkle in maybe a show here and there. That's at least the schedule of what we have during the course of the off season. Once we get to the regular season, we'll try to mix and match as best as we can. And my schedule will change because a lot of Fridays will be completely unavailable, going to a lot of different baseball games here in the Midwest for the Loon system. CNAV, hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps the algorithm of the show. Absolutely great to be able to have. Either Shiva Jones will miss Banda. Absolutely. He's great with what he was able to do. CNAV, Robo, Tanner Scott, Alex Vesia, the Maytag made Banda expendable. I think both Robo and Maytag will make less than what Banda, with Robo, with what Anthony Banda are making, or with what Robo and Maytag, Jack Dreyer are making. They're making the league minimum at this point, less than the 1.6 Anthony Banda is owed. It's about combined with their two salaries, almost the amount that Anthony Banda would make this upcoming year. So we'll see who picks up Anthony Banda. CNAF says San Francisco or the A's will pick up Banda, or the Angels, the Anaheim Angels of Orange County. Let's see, continuing into this, Mr. Classic. No, it's talking about Anthony Banda. It's clearly the options that are part of the reason why the Dodgers decided to send him down. Absolutely agree with that sentiment. Having minor league options makes a massive difference on what are they able to do. And that's the reason why we talked about earlier in the show, the amount of transactions that the Dodgers made up and down throughout the system last year was pretty staggering. 40 to 50, you're talking about every couple of days the Dodgers are making some sort of move on the pitching side. I think that is something that made a massive difference to the Dodgers organization, and with the depth that they have, I think they decided to go ahead and move on for him at this point. Let's see, continuing on with some of this. Showtime LA says Fangraphs currently has Klein over Robo, Hurt and Henriquez in the bullpen. How do you see that playing out, Austin? Good question. It is actually something that I haven't completely done a whole lot of thinking at this point. So let's turn it over to some of the roster construction that I have in just a second, and go ahead and cut it over to this screen right here. We'll go ahead and make this full screen. So how I see it right now is this is likely the starting rotation. Obviously, if injuries happen, things will move around, and this is in alphabetical order, so don't freak out that I'm making Tyler Glasnow or the number 1 or Roki Sasaki the number 3 pitcher. This is obviously not exactly how it would line up, but there's 5 different guys that are automatically slotted into the bullpen. Again, assuming Brusdar Graterol is healthy, ready to go to start the season. Could very much be a little bit up in the open, but there's 3 roster spots that are open for bullpen arms at this point without the addition of Anthony Banda. And assuming Brock Stewart starts the season on the IL, what you would want is you'd probably want one more left-handed reliever. My guess to start the season is it would probably be a Jack Dreyer. I would guess he would start because of how good he was this upcoming year. I've talked a lot about in the past about Jack Dreyer potentially being one of those guys where you might want to start the season on the minor leagues, might want to start the season giving some additional rest because of the increase in workload. I don't necessarily know if they are going to do that. And when you post a sub-3 ERA in your rookie year, I think you probably earn your spot onto this mix. They probably want another right-handed reliever, so you take a choice between Casparius, Edgardo Enriquez, and Kyle Hurt. You can make one sort of choice with them. You could also make a choice with Will Klein. I think there's going to be battle between those guys to be able to be part of the mix. Justin Robleski very well could be. One thing to note is the organization. This is a conversation we had with Fabian Ardaya when he was on the show, is the organization might want to keep Justin Robleski, at least at the beginning of the season, as more of a starting pitcher. That plan might change because Justin Robleski only has one option year, and if they want to not burn up his option year this upcoming year, they might want to make Robo as part of the mix. And if you have Dreyer, Robleski, Vesia, and Scott, you need to have somebody that can get right-handed hitters out, especially if you don't have a ton of trust in Blake Trinan or Brusdar Graterol. So you would have to get one of the guys that you would absolutely trust to get right-handed hitters out before Brock Stewart is able to make it into the mix. So I'm not exactly sure how I see it because I want to leave this open to as many guys as possible to be able to fight for the roster spot. And I want to see how guys look at the beginning of spring training. So I'm not going to make a decision quite yet on what happens. I want to see how guys look in spring training before making that call. Mr. Classic says the Dodgers definitely need a big trade as soon as possible. The question is, I'm assuming that is with Anthony Banda is what they're looking for. Or if there's another move that you're looking for the Dodgers to be able to go ahead and trade, I'd be curious to see what your thought is on that and what need would the Dodgers be addressing with that particular trade. CNAB, I think Kyle Hurt will get some innings under his belt at Oklahoma City before making his big club coming off of injury. Very well could be that they want to slow start it, want to see how he's doing in Oklahoma City before starting the season at the MLB level. And especially with guys like a Ben Kasparius, who last year did not pitch a whole lot in Oklahoma City because he was very much needed and at the beginning of the season extremely effective on the Los Angeles Dodgers. They might want to choose a Ben Kasparius, give some innings early in the season before potentially turning to a Kyle Hurt and making some of that trade-off to be able to make sure you're not overdoing a Casper or Ben Kasparius in the mix on this roster. And I could see Kyle Hurt potentially starting the season at the minor leagues, not because he is ungifted talent-wise, because they want to slow play it throughout the start of the season. Let's see, continuing down with some of this. I want some big trade in Mr. Classic, not just because you need a bit of a roster cut down, and two, because it improves the Dodgers. If the Dodgers were a hotel to read, no vacancy. A couple things to note. This week, I believe it is on Friday, is when players can be added to the 60-day injured list. I actually don't know if it is when the first team reports, has their pitchers or catchers reporting, or if it's the individual organization when their team decides to have pitchers and catchers reporting. Obviously, if it's the individual organization when they decide to have pitchers and catchers reporting, it will be Friday when the Dodgers can add players to the 60-day injured list. I really only think there's one candidate to be able to do that, and that's Brock Stewart. Unlike last year when there was 4 or 5 different guys that you could see added onto the 60-day injured list, I think it's Brock Stewart. And then once Kike Hernandez is added, I think he potentially could be another guy that could be added to the 60-day IL. And then when Evan Phillips is potentially added, I think he's another guy who could potentially be added to the 60-day injured list. But I think the avenue that they could go down would be Brock Stewart, only because there's a lot of question mark of when he's going to be available for the start of the season. And yes, there's a lot of guys that are part of the mix that the Dodgers can have, but they also, some of the guys, most of the guys that are not immediately projected to be on the major league roster also have some flexibility, and that is in part of design by the Dodgers organization. So they want to keep as much talent as they can with the organization. Even if that is not in the best interest of the players, the Dodgers still first have a responsibility to make the organization and the club as good as it possibly can be. And that's in part some of the glut that the Dodgers have on the roster. It is as much talent as they can absorb onto this roster. Let's see, continuing on with a couple more comments that we have. The chat sometimes jumps down to the very bottom, and I got to make my way back up to the top of the top to where it was. We'll roll through some of these. I got another 15 minutes or so that I can go ahead and do. Eli Shriver Jones, Dodgers front office is extremely smart, and they have inside information you don't have. In other words, they were probably good reason for the DFA of Banda instead of Ward. That's where you got to trust the organization and what they're able to do, and I totally agree with that. Christian Rivaro, there's always has to be a sacrificial roster spot in the pitching staff. As pitchers get healthy, they can DFA that spot on the 26-man roster. Absolutely agree. Let's see. Continuing on with a couple of these. It's not like the Dodgers are going to ever tell you inside information what they have in logic. It's options being most likely. And they did the exact same thing, deciding to trade Ryan Brazier for that. Let's see. Continuing. CNAV, trade Wardo and Banda for a Michael Busch type of trade. They would not get that type of return investment, only because Michael Busch, while he was putting up great numbers at the AAA level, was also doing that several years younger than what Ryan Ward has. And I think because he was younger, it became with a lot more projectability going forward. One of the things working against Ryan Ward is he's about to enter his baseball prime coming up. He's about to enter, I believe, his age 28 season, which means that if a front office going ahead and trading for him, yes, they're getting the prime right away, but they're not getting that insane level of production early in their career. And I think that's where you get a lot of prospect return, is not just the production that players are putting up, but also production at a younger level. One of the reasons why people who rank prospects are so high on Josue De Paula, Isaiah Hope, Eduardo Quintero, is because their guys not only are producing, but they're producing at a really young age, which means that there's a lot of projectability going forward. So I think there could be a trade potentially for some of those guys, including Ryan Ward and Anthony Banda. I think that would actually be a good thing for the organization now that they've DFA'd Anthony Banda, and I've already talked about me wanting them to go ahead and trade Ryan Ward. Be great. I would not expect the same type of prospect impact that a Michael Busch type of trade had replicated, or the Michael Busch trade to be replicated, prospect impact type of trade. But I'm sure the Dodgers doing their homework, trying to get the best deal that they possibly can with Anthony Banda, and we'll see what happens over the course of the next couple of days. Let's see. Mr. Classic's not too high on Brock Stewart. I really like his ability to get right-handed hitters out. We got to see him be healthy for the Los Angeles Dodgers this upcoming year. Elishu Jones, why Dodgers picked up Ben Rortvedt if they plan to just DFA him game? Because it's roster manipulation is what the strategy is. It's in part one of the reasons why they decided to bring in Andy Ibanez, even though they decided to DFA him. There is a very specific window of opportunity under this current CBA, 3 to 5 years of service time, in which that player has a little bit of a choice if he passes through waivers, whether he can remain part of the organization and get the guaranteed contract, or he can reject it but not get that contract. We had talked a bit about this on the previous show, so my guess is that they look at Ben Rortvedt and his situation, and they want him to be part on the Dodgers' overall roster, meaning part of the organization, but they don't want to be restricted into making a very specific decision, which with Ben Rortvedt on the 40-man roster, he would have to be on the 26 Major League roster. It's very restrictive for the organization. You have to make this sort of decision. I think they look at Ben Rortvedt and they want him to be part of the organization, obviously for some of the things that we've seen Ben Rortvedt do, but they don't want to be restricted by him having to be on the Major League roster, which with him not having minor league options, they are restricted to one very specific set of circumstances. So if they DFA him again, understanding that all other teams passed on claiming him because the Dodgers are last in line to claim players, the goal would be, in order to with that situation, to get it to where Ben Rortvedt can be sent down to Oklahoma City, and if there's an injury, have him as part of the organization to be able to call up. That is the overall reason why the Dodgers would, if they decided to, DFA Ben Rortvedt. It's the reason why when they had signed Andy Ibanez and then decided to DFA him, why they decided to do that. It was to try to get him to Oklahoma City so they can have him as part of their organization, but not be restricted into making a very specific decision that they might not want to do as an organization. That would be the explanation as to why. You can make a very, very clear argument as to why you would disagree with that, or why you think the organization should go ahead and choose Ben Rortvedt over Dalton Rushing. Lucy Chen, is it fair to assess rushing if Dodgers don't provide consistent playing time for rushing? Is it fair? And when do you think they will DFA Ben Rortvedt again? I would expect fairly soon, but for Ben Rortvedt, only because this is a very narrow window of opportunity where they've seen teams not claim him and they might want to try to make that move again. Or it could be they wait until spring training to pass and see if there's injuries to some of the catchers that they have, and then go ahead and move from there. As far as assessing rushing as an individual player, I think it's difficult to be able to assess him, understanding that his role is much more limited than what it would be on other teams. But as he gets more playing time, you can start to get at least a little bit of an understanding of the type of player that he is, and with the adjustments that he can go ahead and make. I think this year is going to be a very big year for him. And it's not just individual results, it's certain aspects of his game that you're looking for improvements. Maybe a little bit better defensively, a little bit less swing and miss, some of those type of things that are a little bit more on a grand scale. For example, if you look at just 150 plate appearances and judge it based off of the results in and of themselves, that's a little bit smaller of a sample size. But if you look at it with those 150 plate appearances, here's 500, 600 pitches that Dalton Rushing is going ahead and evaluating. That's a little bit of a bigger sample size in which you can evaluate, at least at a little bit of a better degree, what his swing decisions actually are, to see how those are and how he's going to be able to make adjustments from there. So I'm looking a little bit more on a micro type of level to see if we see some improvements for Dalton Rushing, as opposed to the overall aspect of, are these results getting better? Obviously, you want to see the results getting better, but I want to look at the smaller stuff first, especially if he's getting a little bit smaller of a sample size, to see how Dalton Rushing is actually doing. But it's not going to be completely fair if he's part of the Dodgers organization, but I still think there are ways in which the Dodgers can go ahead and get him 65 to 70-ish games throughout this upcoming year, combined with backup catcher type of role, giving Will Smith plenty of time off, and then with Freddie Freeman, perhaps you can get convinced, instead of 162 games for Freddie Freeman, 145 to 150-ish, which could provide 10 to 15 games for Dalton Rushing at first base. I don't think that's completely out of the question going forward for this upcoming year. We got a question: who do you see being the 13 pitchers on the 26-man roster? This will not include a Shohei Ohtani. We talked about this briefly on the show, but if it's the starters, my guess to start the season would be Glasnow, Ohtani, Sasaki, Sheehan, Snell, Yamamoto in alphabetical order. And then the bullpen: Diaz, Gratterall, Scott, Trining, Vesia. That is 10 of your 13 spots. You could throw in, as we did earlier, Jack Dreyer, maybe a Justin Robleski, one of the right-handed relievers that's part of the mix. To start the season makes it really questionable, only because you don't know who's exactly going to be healthy to start the season. But we'll have to wait and see what happens in spring training. Let's see. Continuing with some of this, Lucy Jen, do you think it's ideal to pay 30 to 40 million a year for every starting pitcher in our rotation? I'd like to see some of the pitchers like Sheehan, like Ryan, and the farm develop into great pitchers that we can rely upon. Obviously, it's not ideal, but for the Dodgers organization that seemingly has an endless supply of money, there is a little bit more certainty with some of the players that they are going ahead and acquiring. And one of the reasons why they're paying this much for a lot of starting pitchers is because in the past, they have been in situations where they didn't have an ace. In the 2023 postseason, they did not really have an ace-level pitcher. They had Clayton Kershaw, who was pitching well at the time, but he was past what his prime was. They needed that bona fide ace as part of their rotation, which is when they decided to go ahead and trade for a Tyler Glasnow and then add a Yoshi Yamamoto, so then they wouldn't be in that situation again. But certainly, having some of the guys develop from the farm would be the best use of some of the resources and allow you to make a lot of other moves as well. So we'll see what happens. CNAV, Dodgers always have pitchers stashed on the 60-day IL. That's why they need pitchers with options or being sacrificial roster spot. Klein was supposed to be that guy, but proved himself with grit. And Klein does have a minor league option this upcoming year, so we'll see him in this upcoming year. Let's see. Scoop will leave Detroit in 2026, Mr. Classic, unless the Tigers come back and say we're sorry and give him a huge extension. Super highly unlikely, very much true. We'll see if the Tigers will actually have the guts to go ahead and trade Tarek Skubal. Carino, you know Austin is great data scientist when it comes to excited about getting more data. Absolutely. Super excited. If I had access to some of that information. V-Track, is Mookie Betts washed up as a hitter? Will Dodgers be stuck with a dud the next 6 years? I'm not expecting that. I'm expecting a little bit more of a bounce back for Mookie Betts this upcoming year, but certainly that's going to be one of the main storylines to watch this upcoming year, because last year, bound league average for Mookie Betts as an offensive player, not what you're looking for. You want to see him bounce back to be at the very least in that 120-ish type of WRC plus. If he's a 120 WRC plus, was really solid defense at shortstop, that's a really good player. And I think the Dodgers would go ahead and live with that for a couple of years and then reassess where things are at with Mookie Betts and what he's going to be able to provide defensively and offensively. Let's see, continuing. Elizabeth Jones questions. I read that Kyle Hurt is looking fantastic now. Do you expect to see Kyle Hurt start any games in 2026? interesting question because the emphasis is start, because Kyle Hurt has been in his career more of a starter. I'm basing this based off what we've seen him at the big league level, which has been exclusively as a relief pitcher for the Dodgers organization. One thing I'll look into right now, and I'm actually doing this right live on the air just because I don't necessarily know the answer to this question or don't remember the answer to this question, is what he was looking like as a starter. Yeah, if you go back to the 2024 season, and he basically transitioned to being more of a relief pitcher in Oklahoma City, made his big league debut in 2023, but down at the minor league level, which could be part of a little bit more of rehab type starts, which you can take that into account. He only started 2 of his 13 games, but those were opener type starts because he only pitched 14 and 2/3 innings overall. So my guess is they're kind of transitioning Kyle Hurt to be a little bit more of a relief pitcher. I think that's where he's going to be probably the most effective. Although if needed, if the Dodgers needed a starting pitcher, perhaps kind of similar to what they tried to do with Ben Kasperius last year, they could try to convert Kyle Hurt back into being a starting pitcher. But my guess is they probably want to keep him as a reliever this upcoming year. Let's see. Continuing on, CNAV, Banda is picked up by the A's, $1.5 million off the books. I actually think, and that's with 110% luxury tax. I actually think the Dodgers wanted him to pass through waivers, so then they pay him that money to be depth down in Oklahoma City. But I don't think they're overly concerned about that because I think they have enough depth on the roster. Let's see. Shiva Jones, basically no one yet knows what the Dodgers will do regarding Rortvedt. Don't necessarily know. You try to take the information as best you can and try to make a decision or try to make best guesses of what the organization will do this upcoming year. Let's see. We'll see what happens, though. Very well could be right. And Ben Rortvedt was awesome as part of the Dodgers, so we'll see what happens with him. CNAV, where will Kendall George be in 2026? My guess will be in Tulsa because he's earned it. 130-something WRC plus, and he was outmatching, by the end of his time in Great Lakes, outmatching the Midwest League. I think he needs that next challenge for him. And then it's going to be a question of how can Kendall George continue to make adjustments, optimize the skills that he has, which he is faster than any player I've ever seen at any level across any level of baseball. Extraordinary to be able to watch him. How is he able to provide some consistency at the plate? He was able to find some consistency by making more contact with what he was doing in Great Lakes. Is he going to be able to tap into more than just his speed? Is going to be some of the questions that he has, and I think that next challenge comes from Tulsa. I think it's going to be a lot of KG, Kendall George, Depot, Josue De Paula, and Zaire Hope in Tulsa this upcoming year, similar to how we saw that in Great Lakes last year. That would be my guess for him. Steven Richter, Banda was always the first guy out of the bullpen when the starters imploded. Let's see, and could pitch 1 to 3 innings an outing. I expect Robleski will take that type of role. Kind of what I'm expecting, but we'll see what happens. Is Shiva Jones' question? Mookie Betts states if he plans to play at shortstop from now until he retires. Mookie Betts is asleep through 2026. Could the Dodgers potentially move Mookie Betts to second base? I think it's possible. I think Mookie Betts obviously is setting high goals, high standards for himself, and that is great, commendable for Mookie Betts. We'll see what happens. And one of the main questions is shortstop taken away from some of the offensive production that Mookie Betts has? I don't think it is, and I don't think we have the evidence to say that it is completely because of other circumstances. But if it's another year of league average offense, and he's going to be better suited to be a second baseman because that's going to help his offensive potential, especially because I don't think we can expect him to be the top of the league at shortstop defensively because with his decreasing of athleticism that will happen in the upcoming years. I think eventually still it is my expectation that he's going to move to second base at some point. Don't know when. Could be a little bit later than usual, but we'll see what happens. Steven Richter, Kendall George repeating the year in Great Lakes. The outfield and Loons will be Sirota, George, KG, and Q. That would be great. I would love that. I think he gets that next step because I think he's earned it, though. Not just because he stole 100 bases, but because he went and performed offensively. If you watch Kendall George consistently over the second half last year, it was clear he was a difference maker. He was special and Great Lakes, and I think he's earned that opportunity to move up to Tulsa. We'll see what happens, though. There's going to be a lot of competition and a lot of outfielders at the AA level. So we'll see what happens with KG. I think down the stretch, one of the reasons why he did not get that promotion is one, because they had a lot of outfielders as part of that mix in Tulsa, which some of those guys could be promoted up to AAA. I'm thinking of Tibbs and Earhart. Potentially Cole Myers could be promoted to AAA. But with KG, he also ran a ton down the stretch, and I think was starting to wear out from all the running he did on the base paths. Either Steve Jones question, I'm a big fan of AAA OKC Dodgers Noah Miller. He's elite at shortstop. Underestimate how good he is at the shortstop position, but he hasn't proven as much with his big league bat. Do you think he'll ever get a shot at an MLB team? I think the defense is going to be good enough to where he gets some sort of opportunity at the big league level. I think the Dodgers are still hoping that he can be able to develop to where he can be even more of a league average to maybe even slightly below league average type of bat. I think if he gets to that level, I think he's going to provide a ton of value either for the Dodgers or another team. And let's remember, Noah Miller, still really young. Last year was his age 22 season, which means this upcoming year, he's going to be entering into his age 23 season. Still plenty of time for Noah Miller to be able to develop into a little bit of a better hitter than what he has been throughout his minor league career. So we'll see what happens with him. Let's see. Continuing on with a couple of these, Steven Richter, the Loons outfield of 2026, maybe the outfield of the Dodgers in 2030. We'll see what happens with Great Lakes. Obviously, it'll be tough to beat out the outfield from 2025, but I have high hopes for the Loons this upcoming year, as I always do. Which, by the way, jersey I'm wearing is an alternative identity for the Great Lakes Loons. This is their Great Lakes Pontooners merch that you can get. You can get this merch, loons.milbstore.com. We'll be going into something in just a minute, but first I got to get to a super chat. See Christopher Navarro, can't thank you enough. $5 super chat, just great show. Austin Brubaker, once again, let's pick a minor league system game once a week to watch together as Dodgers Dogs live comments and Q&A. That'll be something where I still got to talk with Casey to be able to talk through and plan certain things out. It will depend on what the week is and what we actually have, but I'm sure we can think of something where Casey and I, and even if it's something where, because Casey does a lot of time watching the games, cutting different video from each one of the games to be able to post on social media, even if it's part of that process, being able to do that live with you guys actually be a really fun idea for us to be able to explore. It will depend on which games I'm not going to, only because I think there's already 40 or so games that I'm going to for the Loons this upcoming year, so I'll be going quite a bit, but we'll try to get some stuff for you guys for that, and especially with the continued support that you guys have, that's a good way for us to be able to go ahead and do these additional shows for you guys. Can't thank you enough, CNAB, for that. Let's continue on. Steven Richter, Dodgers have to trade Ryan Ward, right? That would be my hope for what the organization would do. Let's see. Al Minerva says, you'll got to run. Brendan Warford will be the backup. Dalton Rush would be traded for Skubal. Very well could be, and that would be amazing to be able to get Skubal. And ultimately, with the backup catcher, it's not going to have a tremendous impact on this team. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see what happens. We'll check back on that, Owl Minerva. Thank you for joining in on the show that we have. Let's see. Another comment. Truly believe Skubal trade will be made this week and Russian will be part of it. So Steven. And Ela Shiva, I hope the Dodgers don't trade Emmett Sheehan. I really hope they don't trade Emmett Sheehan as well. Let's see. Continuing on for a couple of these comments. See if there's anything else that we got to go ahead and hit on. What is Bobby Miller's 2026 outlook? Kristen Rivera's such electric stuff, but I'm not so great execution. I don't know what to expect of Bobby Miller this upcoming year, and I think we're all just waiting to see what happens for him. I just want to see what it looks like in spring training. Obviously, last year sucked, getting hit on basically the first game of going ahead and playing out there. I think it would be. I think it was very difficult for Bobby Miller to go ahead and do that. So I'm curious to see what he does, hopefully with a full spring training, and we'll see what happens. Let's see, continuing on with this, Ela Shiva, do you expect Freddie to be our first base until he is 40 years old? I'm not fully expecting that. and we'll get into this on a later show just because I'm running out of time and I want to get to one more thing for you guys, just because I mentioned it on the previous show, but I want to showcase it to you guys. I actually am not fully convinced that the Dodgers are or necessarily should bring back Freddie Freeman after his contract expires. And this is a conversation for a little bit of a different show, perhaps this is going to be something that we could explore next Monday. But the question is, should the Dodgers bring back Freddie Freeman? He's got 2 more years under his contract. Should the Dodgers go ahead and re-sign him after that? I think it's a difference of question of will they versus should they going into this upcoming year. I'm curious what you guys think. I'm still debating back and forth on that. And in fact, I don't want the Dodgers to make any decision right now to be able to do that. I want the Dodgers to wait and evaluate to see where Freddie Freeman is at and then make some sort of decision down the line. I don't want the Dodgers to rush into any type of decision. We can go ahead and explore that in a future Monday show. One thing I do want to point out to you guys, or make sure that you guys can go ahead and be aware of, just because this is fun. I've mentioned this on part of the previous show that I had. I had mentioned that the Loons, and the reason why I'm wearing Loons jerseys is just because it's fun to be able to showcase off some of the great jerseys that the Loons have. They had just released one of their new alternate identities. I want to make sure that you guys just see what that is. I mentioned it with Casey to close out the show. This is a new alternate identity. This is on the Loons website. You can go ahead and find that with the alternate identities, loons.com. Go ahead and go to these. The Michigan Dogmen. This is sweet what the Loons have come up with there. This primary logo, some of the word marks that they have. Great thing. So essentially what this is based off of is a local Michigan legend, the Michigan Dogman, which is essentially some sort of 7-foot tall wolf-like creature that essentially wanders the woods of Michigan. Kind of similar to like a Bigfoot type of creature. And the Loons just released that. A lot of great promotions. You can see hat and jersey right there. This stuff actually is available. Some of the stuff pre-order or some of the other merch that they have available. Loons.milbstore.com. I have to wait for some of my merch to be able to come just because a lot of it is pre-ordered. But soon enough, I'm sure you'll be seeing me wearing some of this merch that you have. Go out if you guys are interested in some of this. Go support some of the minor league teams that are part of the Dodgers system, just because a lot of these minor league teams look for as much support as they possibly can. And this type of stuff, the fun, creative type of thing, really should be highlighted as much as possible within the system, because I want to make sure that the Dodgers overall as an organization are as successful as possible, which doesn't just include the major league team. It includes also the minor league teams as well to make an overall well-run organization. And just some fun, unique, creative stuff that the organization does. And soon enough, you'll be seeing me wear a Michigan Dogman t-shirt, Michigan Dogman hat as well for you guys. So that's going to do it here. Dodgers Dogs is part of the Dodgers Daily Network. I would go into additional comments, questions with you guys, but I do have to run. I've got some stuff that I got to do tonight. Got practice for the youth group. I help lead some of the youth group worship team that they have, so I have to go to a practice with that. And they got stuff later in the night. So I can't thank you guys for tuning in. Casey and I will be back probably on Wednesday for a show with the two of us. He also has an interview that he's going to be releasing hopefully at some point throughout the week. I don't know if that's going to be tomorrow. I don't know if that's going to be later in the week. We'll have to ask Casey when that interview is going to be coming up. But I can't thank you guys enough for tuning in. CNAV, thank you for the super chat and for all of you guys and the support that you guys have put into this show. We only do it because you guys enjoy this content and really help support us. So I can't thank you guys enough. And it is also something that we love Dodgers baseball. Pitchers and catchers are reporting in a couple days on Friday, which means Dodgers baseball is almost here. Until then, thank you for tuning in. God bless and go Dodgers.